Welcome to Horror Makes Us Happy, the podcast where we ask the question, what is it about horror that makes us happy? Your hosts are Steve Becker and myself, Chris Whitman, and you can find out more about us at our website, horrormakesushappy.com. Before we get started, this is the trigger warning. This is a horror culture podcast. We're going to be talking about horror things, which could involve sensitive subjects such as child abuse, rape, F-bombs, murder, bad things. We're going to be talking about bad things. That is the trigger warning, so now I can say fuck. Coming up in the future, we're going to be speaking with producer Ray Angelic. But today, we have with us Sara Neidorf, a musician and film curator known for such bands as Aptera, Mellowdeath, and Sarattma. And she's also the main curator for the Final Girls Berlin Film Festival.
Hello.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Our pleasure.
Yes.
You could also say thank you to Sarah Langan, I think it was, that suggested you.
She's a Sarah with an H, isn't she?
No, I think I screwed up. I think that was Laura Lee Barr. It's one of the two.
Oh yeah, it must have been Laura Lee Barr. She's a filmmaker whose films we've shown before, and she's awesome.
There you go. Cool. So actually, before we get into the meat of the interview, do you want to let us know what you're currently working on?
I'm about to release a new album with Mellowdeath. We're in the mix and master process now. I just shot a music video with Aptera yesterday.
Cool.
Nice.
I got new material coming with a few other bands, and I'm also currently drumming for some dance and theater pieces. So this is something you can only see if you're in Berlin, but that's what those are the things I'm up to at the moment. And then Final Girls has events going on throughout the year. We did a virtual conference last weekend called The Brain Binge, and that was awesome. That there will be some YouTube videos posted from that in the next week or so. And we've got some best of screenings coming up in different cities, and the next full edition will be in February.
When you say in different cities, I assume you mean in Germany?
No, all over the place. We're going to be in Portland and Philly and London, and I think in New York as well.
Yeah, I was checking out the tour schedule earlier, and it's quite a few different places all over the place. No Florida, though. I don't know why.
Well, if you want to set up a screening with us, it's super easy. I mean, obviously, we're not going to be able to fly out there, but we can send you the films, and as long as you can find a venue and you have a nice little film community that might be interested in it, then it's easy.
I have tried this before with other horror film artists, and you'd think it would be easy to set up a small indie film festival here, but it's not anymore.
Especially after COVID.
Yeah, I think it's a lot harder in the U.S. than it is in Berlin, for instance. But I mean, you wouldn't need to host the whole festival. It would just be one screening of short films. One compilation.
I tried that. It was it Flowers 2, Steve? I was going to do that, and I don't know. It was fucking impossible. Film theater owners are not cool here.
Damn, sorry to hear that.
We used to have one, but they closed.
Talking about the state.
No, picture show on Del Mabry.
Okay, yeah.
Sometimes it can even just be in a small concert venue or in a coffee shop or any place that has a screen they can pull down, and have a projector and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's why I asked about the state, because the State Theater in downtown St. Pete was the local punk bar too. And
I never tried this state. I should have asked them. Yeah, because usually just when it came to the content, I was trying, just small restaurants or venues, or like you said, some place that you can just stretch down a projector. And when I got to the content, they're like, no.
Anywho, let's start with childhood. What are some of your earliest memories of scary things?
Scary things. So not necessarily films, just scary things.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, can be anything: films, literature, some weird coat that was on a rack at the corner of your room that freaked you out.
Oh, that's a funny thing to mention. I did have, I had one of those big closets that took up a whole wall with 3 sliding doors, and I would always lie in bed with one of the doors slightly ajar and just think about that endless darkness that was within there. Anything could be happening in there. Yeah. Any of my clothing could be coming alive, or
could be a party in there. Who knows? Or
the leprechaun might be in there, because I did see Leprechaun when I was 8 years old, because that's what was in Blockbuster Video's horror section that looked hilarious and vaguely harmless enough. So, which it was not. It was not harmless at all. But yeah, that was an early one for me and another childhood friend who watched that together. It's funny. I feel like I was watching horror from the time I was super young, but I was not so like engaged with my environment in a way that was like so horror based. Like I wasn't really afraid of very much. Like I talked about this like darkness in my closet, but it wasn't something that scared me. It just like fascinated me. Like I would look in there and be like, anything could be in there. Like it would like really stimulate my my imagination, but not in a way that scared me. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that tracks. There's like two trains of thoughts with most guests we interview: people that have just a natural interest in horror when they're young, or people that have a fear of it.
Mm-hmm. Also, Goosebump books. I read those a lot.
Yeah. When
I was like, from the time I was, I don't know, even 5-6 years old, my mom was reading them to me and my brother. I have like a cute memory of us reading I think it's called like Egg Creatures from Mars or something like that. It was, I have a very specific memory of like loving the cover of that book and like lying in bed and having that read to me as a little one.
What was the cover?
It was just these like gross little egg-shaped Martians. Just like little slime creatures. And I thought they were cute. And my grandmother used to also tell us scary stories. She used to talk about like there was a witch in the closet. Again, another closet story. Like, don't go in the closet. There's a witch in there. And like she'd tell a little fable about this little girl named Alice, and she was not supposed to go in the closet, but she did, and the witch came out and ate her. It was a very simple story. It wasn't, there weren't so many twists and turns, just, oh, you're not supposed to do this, but then you do it and you get eaten by a witch or something like that. Or the Sandman, if I didn't go to sleep. Again, this is very, very early memories.
Right.
You better go to sleep or the Sandman's going to get you. And I used to always ask to have this little Sandman songs sung to me. Mm-hmm. And again, I was like super, I was like tantalized by it. Like, oh my God, I wonder if I can meet the Sandman, if I stay up. Yeah.
So the Sandman was your Santa Claus. Got it.
So funny. Yeah. I mean, I'm Jewish, so we didn't have, we all knew Santa Claus was a fake from the beginning. We would always like, oh, these kids are such chumps.
But Sandman is real.
That's a fun aspect. I never really looked at it that way with the Jewish upbringing and Santa Claus. It's like the whole like Sara thing we were talking about earlier, looking down on other people. Like, oh, you believe in Santa Claus? That's cute.
Exactly. I was like, oh, that's cute. I'll let them have their fun. I didn't want to spoil it for anyone.
A large fat man comes down your chimney and has presents enough for the entire world in one bag. Right.
But I mean, as a horror fan, I'm a fan of the idea of suspension of disbelief. So I wasn't interested in like revealing the truth to everyone. I was more just like, okay, let's all suspend our disbelief and enjoy this.
Yes, but the Sandman, he was real.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't really think so, but I liked it.
Yes. I'm wondering if you've ever heard about the story of Bluebeard.
Oh yeah, I mean, there was a Catherine Breillat movie called Bluebeard. I don't know if you've... And also there's a Joanna Newsom song. I think it's called Go Long, if I'm not mistaken, which is like very specifically telling the story of Bluebeard. Creepy as hell.
Yes. Well, your story about Alice, the witch in the closet, remind me of that.
Right, because she was the girl is told not to go into that secret room with... What is it, lined with the teeth of... Yeah.
You will regret it. Let's see. Did you participate in Halloween as a child?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
That's what I mean. Now I live in Berlin. I grew up in New Jersey, right outside of Philly. And
Camden?
Yeah, I was in Camden County.
Cherry Hill.
Yep, Cherry Hill. I mean that was the neighboring town. I'm reluctant to mention my town name because it's just such a boring, soulless place that I don't want to be associated with it.
I went for one semester of school in Camden, and my mom's side is from Philly, so.
Ah, cool. Yeah. So yeah, there's big Halloween culture there for sure. Yes.
Oh yeah. Well, Devil's Night or Mischief Night. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a thing, and everyone not everyone, but a lot of people decorate their lawns and their front yards with like crazy, skeletons hanging from trees and animated technology. And people get really they get really elaborate with it and spend a lot of money on these front lawn displays and everything. And yeah, I mean, I was trick-or-treating forever. Now, yeah, as I said, now I live in Berlin and there is not really any Halloween culture here, which bums me out so much. Every year I'm like, oh my God, I miss Halloween. Like there's a little bit, like it's, there's so many expats here that we've brought over a bit of that culture, but it's not nearly as good. And like every now and again, like you'll get like one trick-or-treater and it's like, sorry, I didn't count on you coming. I don't have anything for you because you're the only one. So I feel bad. But no, yeah, I did that. And I enjoyed dressing up as like horror clowns and things like that as well from the time I was like 9-10 years old.
Did you have a favorite costume?
Probably. Yeah. I have like an ongoing sort of clown obsession, based on horror that started when I was probably about 9 years old and had seen it for the first time around that age. And also, like, I loved the Killer Clowns from Outer Space.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that one. How old were you when you saw Killer Clowns?
Probably about 11. Okay. I don't know, something like that. And then I had met the filmmakers at the Monster Mania convention, which was awesome. Right outside of Philly, also in New Jersey. Yeah, they were awesome. They actually painted a special clown for me. They were they did like little individual commissions, and I didn't even ask for it. They were just like, I don't know. They were flattered by my fascination, and very possibly they might have been flirting with my mom. I'm not sure, but but it was very cute. So yeah, that's like, I love the creepy ones. I like the harmless ones as well. I feel like they're kind of underdog figures because everyone has this phobia against them. So I'm like fascinated with them and why they're such hated creatures.
It's because they eat children,
right?
Some of them do. So, do you remember having a least favorite costume?
No.
Okay. Not every question's going to land. We just ask because you never know.
Do you have a least favorite Halloween costume?
I do. Yes. And ironically enough, it was a clown costume.
The old Pagliacci.
Yes. Let's see. Did you have any scary dreams when you were a kid?
Of course. I still have scary dreams all the damn time. I'm thinking. I remember having that the first time I had that dream where I was running away from someone chasing me probably with a knife, and I couldn't scream. Like I opened my mouth to scream and no noise came out, and I also couldn't move. Like I was paralyzed in this path. So yeah, and that's happened a few times since. But I remember the very first time it happened, and I was just like, that was fucking horrifying. And again, I was probably like a little bit also like excited by how horrifying it was. Because I have this, fascination with all kinds of horror narratives, and I was interested in how my own psyche could create that too.
Was there ever a time in your childhood when you were actually terrified of something in real life?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I fought with my brother all the time. I was terrified of him. It might sound like, oh, how cute, two kids fighting, but like, it got brutal and violent sometimes when we were kids. Yeah, I think I was afraid of him, being afraid of something in a city, or like being afraid. I mean, this is real, right? Just from you're afraid of it in childhood and afraid of it in adulthood, that like someone's going to break into your home or to your car or to wherever you are and violate your sense of safety, that, like you can't actually be safe.
Right.
Yeah.
Can relate.
I can't think of super specific situations, but just like that as a recurring sort of theme. Yeah. Okay. Sorry.
No, it's okay. Like I said, not every question's in land. You never know what's going to come up until you ask. So
you were going to mention your cousin?
Yeah, he hit me in the head with a hammer, and I've got a nice little dent in my head from it.
Jesus, I don't think I've ever heard this story. That's wow. Yeah. I mean, there's sibling rivalry, and then there's attempted homicide.
Yeah, it wasn't attempted homicide. I was in middle school, and I think he might have been in like 5th grade or 6th grade, and they had found a stray cat that they were going to keep, and they were building a cat house, quote unquote, instead of a dog house. And I remember it so vividly. He was trying to nail these 2 pieces of wood together, but I could see from the angle that I was sitting at that where he was putting the nail in was going to miss the other board. And I was trying to point this out to him, and he wouldn't listen. And he got so frustrated
with your head.
No, with my finger.
It's this one.
But he got frustrated with me, and he actually hit me in the head with the hammer. And I chased him around the house, and our family's freaking out. And I think I tried to cut through the house and go through the garage to catch him because he was a little faster than I was. And I think my uncle either grabbed me or grabbed him and separated us. But yeah, I got a nice little dent.
Damn.
I mean, we weren't violent towards each other to the point of it was I don't want to say it was like it wasn't. I just feel like saying it wasn't a bad thing. Like we were obviously it was a violent act, but we weren't antagonistic towards each other, if that makes sense. Like we did dumb shit, and I think that was just one of those dumb things that he wasn't thinking. His brain wasn't processing it the way that
kids do dumb things. They don't really know the ramifications of the things. This one time I was trying trefanning on a friend of mine's head, and I pulled out the power drill, and Mom was like, "No."
Yeah, I think he saw one too many Acme cartoons, or what should we call it? Merry Melodies, Warner Brothers.
You can drop an anvil on someone's head; they're fine. It'll just get pushed off by the lump.
Yes. Was there ever a time in your childhood when you felt completely calm or safe or at bliss?
Interesting question. Well, I was just thinking of the last question. I was thinking that my fears were more like an ongoing sense of dread or anxiety that was like related to social situations. Mm-hmm. Just like whatever, having to be on a class trip with a bunch of kids I hated and like struggling to find any common ground with them or like fit in or whatever like this. And this has, this just kind of has been an ongoing theme, phenomenon in my life. So a sense of calmness or bliss though. I mean, I have a very good relationship with my mother. I mean, she passed away in 2020, but I still have a good relationship with her, I will say.
Sorry to hear that.
Yeah, thank you. So she and I always enjoyed each other's company, and I think in general, just like chill times hanging out with her at any point have been like really calm and positive experiences for me. Also watching films together. We definitely bonded over film.
Was she a horror fan?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
She's definitely the person who got me into horror. She showed me Rosemary's Baby and The Shining. And
oh wait, how old were you?
I think I was 13, possibly 12.
That's old enough.
Yeah. I appreciate it. I was already definitely old enough to appreciate it. And
quote unquote appreciate it.
And we talked about it. Like she, it was really big for me that she treated me kind of like a peer whose opinion she was interested in. Like there were always really good in-depth discussions as we were watching and after we were watching, and yeah, it was something that we connected over. We shared a lot of inside jokes, a lot like a common language related to cinema, which became part of how we would relate to the world as well.
Do you think those conversations helped frame horror for you in a way that wasn't scary? I mean, like, because you talked about, for example, that, the closet and your fascination, and a lot of our guests have some guests just were straight enjoyers of horror from the go. And then others, there was like this dividing line where previously they were afraid. And then after that, they started to enjoy it. Like there was something that they had to experience or learn. Do you think there was like something like that with your mom where, she helped you either transition from one to the other or just gave it to you straight away that this is to be enjoyed?
Oh yeah. I mean, I always enjoyed horror movies. There was no other part. There was nothing. I didn't transition from being like afraid and averse to them to loving them. It's just, I've always loved them for sure. Okay.
I wonder if it's a case of like, because with your mom being a horror fan, I wonder if it's just goes back to even before you can remember it, because that's possible too.
Yeah, and like and reading Goosebumps when I was younger, watching Who's Afraid of the Dark on TV, kid of the '90s,
Mhm.
and yeah, and my grandmother telling me scary stories. Like I think it's just something I always associate with like it's like a comfort homey feeling for me. Yeah.
Was your grandmother a horror fan?
Well, she loved the movie The Bad Seed, which she showed to my mother when she was a girl, and also, yeah, they both showed that to me when I was super young. Have you either of you seen The Bad Seed from the 50s?
I have
It
not.
sounds familiar.
It's a classic evil child movie.
Oh,
It's like the
okay.
first. It's the original evil child movie.
So it has nothing to do with Nick Cage.
No. But maybe he took the name
Ah.
from this. I think this was made in 1950, if I'm not mistaken.
56. I just looked it up.
56. Thank you for letting me know. So that was 1 year before my mother was born, actually. Yeah, and I remember being shown this when I was super young, and we laughed about it. Like it was this kind of thing where, if I was misbehaving or something, then they would make a joke that I was the bad seed or something like
Mhm.
that. Like it was just this ongoing, running joke that we had. And then after that, watching The Omen or The Orphan or Joshua or, there's so many of these other evil kid movies that this was like a fun thing to watch and to laugh at when I was younger.
Cool. Well, even if your mother didn't like sit you down to educate you, there may have been because you just see the enjoyment in your own mother's face, her eyes and the way she smiles and laughs and things like that. And there, you can pick things up non-verbally too. I'm wondering your brother, younger brother, older brother?
He's 2 years older.
Okay. Is he also a horror fan?
I don't think so. We don't really talk or get along, so I don't really have too much to say about him.
Okay.
To be honest.
Other than horrifying you, maybe.
Yeah, he horrified me. He was a source of real life horror, and he kind of remains a source of real life horror. But I don't want to say too much. It seems
understood.
Feels a bit skeezy to talk about him, to be honest.
Understood. Sorry.
It's okay.
Well, all right. So let's jump into teenage years. Then you said you were about 13 when you saw Rosemary's Baby. Do you remember anything else from your teen years that really jumps out to you as memorable?
Oh man, I mean, I was already watching so much. There was not. I feel like my cinematic coming of age happened when I was like 12 or 13 years old. So by the time I was in my teens, I was like just watching everything. My mom and I went to the cinema together all the time. Yeah, I don't know if you, when you were in Philly, I don't know if you remember the Ritz cinemas. It's like, those are like the art house cinema chain of Philly. And then there was also an art house multiplex in my town it was called the Ritz 16. So we just had this amazing selection of films around the corner from us as well that we would almost every weekend, we would go and buy a ticket for one movie and then movie hop illegally. It was like us and all the old ladies. And we would even see the old ladies doing it too. We were like, that grandma was in that last movie with us. And yeah, this was just like a tradition of ours to like movie hop to 3 different films on a Saturday. This is because I didn't have so many friends my own age at the age of 13, 14. So I was just movie hopping with my mom, and that was totally fine for me. Those were really good memories. Yeah, so it's hard for me to say like, oh, this is like a defining film of my teenage years, because it's sort of like, I mean, I'm sure if we dig deeper and we get to more specifics, I'm sure I can do that. But like, yeah, I was just consuming so much.
Well, not necessarily looking for a defining film, but usually like the first 2 or 3 that come to mind for a reason.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, as I said, Rosemary's Baby was huge for me. Yeah. Hellraiser, but I saw that when I was 10. So I was already super young when I saw Hellraiser. Yeah. I was not a teen, but I still adore that film.
It is a classic. Have you seen the new one?
I've seen the new one. I like it, but I don't like it nearly as much as the original.
Well, yeah. I mean, like for nostalgia's sake, just because it's the original, that one's still top.
Yeah, it does some interesting things, but I feel
It does.
missteps in some ways too.
Same. Yeah, it had pros and cons. I do like the redesign of the puzzle box and how the lament configuration is named that because you lament the fact that you decided to stay in this boring mortal world. Spoilers for anyone who hasn't seen it. Sorry.
What a good name too, the lament configuration.
Right.
And the Shining. The Shining is big too for me. I mentioned that already at that being big at the time. But I'm sure there are so many others. Let me take a quick peek at the little list that I was making earlier. It's funny, these are mostly later 2000s things that I have on this list. Oh yeah, May. I'm gonna list. Yeah, totally. This was a huge one for me that I related to deeply. So
why?
Just like this, as I mentioned, being a bit of an ill fit with my peers. So I could very much relate to her as an outcast.
Mm-hmm. She was quite awkward. Delightfully awkward, actually.
Oh, yeah.
The hands. You have such beautiful hands.
Yeah, and just like obsession. And I think for me, that's a big theme that I like exploring in cinema, especially, and and in life. But yeah, I think it's a great sort of like exploration of being like a grimy sort of like underdog figure, like just getting into the nitty gritty of like, yeah, what the experience of being on the outside is in that way.
Let's go back to Hellraiser because I put that in my notes further up under childhood, just for tracking. But what was important to you about that one?
I do love a female villain. I loved Julia, this evil stepmother who was going out and finding men to kill for the reanimating her lover's body. I mean, I think there's also something super compelling about this sort of this alternate dimension of like of these demons who can possibly show you, right? They say like they're angels to some, demons to others. They can show you the greatest pleasures you'll ever know or kill you. Yeah, there's something super fascinating to me about that ambivalence, that people are like abandoning everything and taking this risk to have this this like overwhelming sensory experience. There's a lot to it.
There is, yeah.
And it's also like it's become sort of like a queer, kinky BDSM classic in a way. These the way that the Cenobites are styled and what they represent, and just like there's such good sound design as well.
Oh yeah, the score.
Yeah, the score is amazing.
Timeless. And
just like when you hear they're in this room with all of these like chains and hooks everywhere and it's rotating and you hear the chains clinking. You hear this kind of like the flesh hitting against these different metal contraptions. I don't know. Yes. It's just like, it's this kind of film where I was just like, yes, I'm a freak that loves the horrific. Like, I love this. It's like, it's delicious to me, So I think it really, it kind of revels in that in a way. And like Clive Barker is also, he's gay and a perv. And like, there's just sort of like, I really like how like unapologetic he is in the art that he makes.
Absolutely.
Off topic, but we've interviewed Barbie Wilde, Nicholas Berman Vince, and Simon Bamford. So if you enjoyed Hellraiser, feel free to go back and check out those episodes because there's some very interesting things in all three of those.
They were great.
Cool.
We're still trying to reach out to Mr. Bradley, but that is a work in progress.
I met him at Monster Mania as well.
Nice.
Oh yeah.
I have a signed headshot above the bed in my childhood bedroom, and it says like, "Dear awesome. Sarah, see you in hell, Doug Bradley."
That is great.
I love it. Yeah. He was a very sweet, mild-mannered British man.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
So The Shining, what did you like about that one?
I loved the sense of place. I really love films that are about isolation, like the horrors that can come out of isolation. It's just talking about that in relation to The Eyes of My Mother with my friends this morning.
That one's dark.
Yeah, it's super dark. I think, good way. Yeah. I think The Shining, there's really brilliant performances in it. especially from Shelley Duvall. Though I don't think it's awesome that, there's a lot that's been revealed and written about how Stanley Kubrick was like super abusive towards her on set. Not awesome. Of course, I also mentioned Rosemary's Baby, and I'd be remiss not to say that obviously I'm horrified by Roman Polanski's doings as well, and I don't condone that, but I think there's a lot of really brilliant performances in these films that we shouldn't erase just because there were shitty men involved in the making of these films. Yeah, I think it's really smart the way that it plays with time. It's the sort of supernatural elements of it are also really interesting. Descent into madness, just like, yeah, again, this like the sense of scale as well, that they're just these three tiny people in this like enormous, creepy, abandoned, like empty hotel, and there's no one. There's just like there's so much about it that is really compelling and really well done. Yeah, great film. Okay. I haven't seen it in a good number of years now, but it remains a favorite for sure.
Yeah. Actually, so going back to Rosemary's Baby, because we didn't really talk too much about that. What are some of your initial thoughts on that?
I mean, I think that it's one of my favorite examples of gaslighting horror, right? Where like it's such a huge trope in horror that I'm also really fascinated by, is like women being told that they're wrong, that their experiences or their feelings or whatever is that they're not valid, that they're, and this kind of sense of madness that comes from being consistently told that you're making up your reality and it's not valid and it's not true, and then literally being institutionalized for it, right? Or being like controlled by the medical establishment. Yeah, I just think this is like utterly horrific, and it's true. I mean, it's just like there's so much. This is such a huge part of women's experiences, not just in the past, but even in the present. Right. Like being, whatever, misdiagnosed or told that they're not actually sick with the thing that they are sick with, or and in the past it was super common for young women to be just like thrown into institutions if they weren't following the rules of what was acceptable. So, I mean, I feel in some ways it's like, okay, it's been done. Like it's been done a lot, but there's still so much actually to be done with it. And there are so many stories that still need to be told.
Yeah. So in teens, I don't know exactly when you moved to Germany, but were you still involved in Halloween in your teens?
Yeah, I moved here in 2012 when I was out of college. So okay. I grew up and went to college in the US. Okay. Did I trick or treat? No, I guess I stopped when I was about 12.
Okay.
I think beyond that point, it would have been a little too funny. Did you dress up to go to parties? I think so. I don't remember so many Halloween party experiences. In Berlin, yeah, as an adult, a few. In college, I guess, yeah, there must have been some in college. And then film marathons also. Like sometimes there's like, overnight film marathons that are happening here or were happening in Philly.
Mm-hmm. But for teens, nothing in the teens.
No, maybe like my very late teens. But like in high school, no. I mean, I was, as I mentioned a few times now, I was a weirdo and an outcast. I didn't have like a bunch of cool friends my age when I was 15, 16 years old. Had like, one or two. And then like, yeah, online friends, right? This kind of, I was a child of the internet, so I also had my communities there. But no.
That may answer a different question that we sometimes ask, which is, were you building any friendships? Did you have any friends who were fans of horror at that age?
Yeah, for sure. My childhood friend, Megan, who I was close with in most of my teen years, we watched a bunch of horror together. I remember watching Hellraiser with her and her mom, and we were laughing our asses off. Like her mom was hilarious. We would just joke a lot about what we were watching, and she liked like trashier stuff as well. So she got me a bit into trashy cinema, but that was never my main interest. But I can have fun with that in a social setting.
I'm curious, trashy in what way?
I mean, like slasher B movie stuff.
Okay, I didn't know if you were going to go like with like Magic Mike kind of.
Oh, that's funny too. Not the first film on my mind, but
What?
yeah, totally.
I was thinking trashy like cheesy horror.
Yeah, I was thinking cheesy horror. Yeah, like I think, yeah, but I don't know, like Starship Troopers. This is not really a horror movie. I just remember that she was a fan of that, like these kinds of like
It's pretty gory.
older.
There's some scenes in there.
Yeah, and I had a childhood friend also when I was younger who I think he was the one who got me into the more brutal horror when I was young. I kind of I don't really think about him that often because he was a bit weird. He was a bit of a tyrant. He was kind of a controlling, this isn't my therapy session, so I don't need to go into too much about that. But but he got me into like Texas Chainsaw Massacre when we were like 10 years old or so.
Okay.
Slasher films as well. Yeah, we dressed up as clowns together in that memory that I talked about earlier. I feel like maybe even like stuff like Last House on the Left, like super brutal stuff when you're too young to be watching extremely brutal stuff.
Yeah.
I
had gleaned that one at a young age too, and I was like, "All right, guys, I'm gonna go in the other room. Let me know when this scene is done."
Yeah.
On the
I remember watching. I'm sorry. There was like also. I remember being, I don't know, like 11 years old or so, and reading a lot of online like forums that were like, these are the most disturbing films of all time, with stuff like
the video nasties
on it, and yeah. So this was something that I was also kind of fascinated by from an early age, just as a sort of like endurance test, like, okay, well, can I watch this? But that was young. That was, I mean, again, too young, but also there was a point at which I like kind of matured beyond it a little bit, where I was like, this isn't actually what's interesting to me.
Which is fair.
Yeah.
So let's see. Did you have any really scary dreams as a teen, or reoccurring ones?
I don't recall anything super horrific from my teenage years in terms of dreams. I think that was more like social horror was and still is kind of like a very big one for my real life experience. Just like, being in some kind of group setting, feeling ostracized, or like being accused of something and feeling like a pariah because of this, I've done something really terrible and people are making me feel like shit about it, whatever it might be. Something like that in a dream. And surely also in life. Yeah.
This is going to be a touchy question, but I'll ask it. Do you feel like that was related to either you being a horror fan, potentially you being Jewish, maybe both, and something else in as well? Like, where do you any idea where that came from?
That's an interesting question. I don't think it has anything to do with me being a horror fan.
Okay.
But maybe I'm answering that too quickly by saying that, because I think it's all related to like, it's all part of that kind of aesthetic. Like, I was like a young goth, I like new metal that was out in the late 90s and early 2000s, and Kitty and Korn and Slipknot, and I was wearing those shirts, and wearing horror shirts. I remember I had a shirt with Pennywise the Clown on it when I was like 10 years old that I would wear to school. And
awesome.
So it's all connected in there. I have a Hellraiser shirt with Pinhead on it, so I'm still wearing this shit. Like I never grew out of it. So yeah, on an aesthetic level, yeah, sure. I guess I set myself apart in that way, and was a bit treated differently for this as a preteen and stuff. I think by the time I was a teenager, there were more. It was more like common that people were expressing themselves in alternative ways, so it wasn't really such an issue. But yeah, let's say from like 10 to 13 or so, that definitely wasn't easy. But yeah, I'm interested more in your question about whether it has to do with being Jewish. And I think where I grew up, it was a pretty mixed environment. There was definitely a big Jewish community in suburban New Jersey near Philly, and in Philly. So I wasn't so different for it, but yeah, it was more kind of just like in the air in the larger American media. Yeah, and that kid who I mentioned, who I'm not giving the name of, who I was friends with when I was young, who was a bit a bit abusive. He also was he sometimes said anti-Semitic things, actually, that kind of messed with my sense of self and my sense of self-esteem at that age. So that was an experience that was disturbing for me. Or you'd hear kids saying something like using the word Jew as an insult, like "don't be a Jew" or "don't, you're such a Jew" or something like that, like just calling that to their other friends who aren't even Jewish, right? Just kind of like, it was kind of similar to saying like, "oh, that's so gay," which
I was just going to say that.
even more is is related to my experience of being different, I think, because I also knew that I was different in that way, that I was queer, and I always knew that from the time I was like 6-7 years old. So it was not something I came into later. It was something that I always knew about myself.
Interesting.
Yeah,
because and back in the 80s and 90s, and by we I mean we as a society were just so much more offensive than we knew. Things are much more politically correct and tolerant now, and just like you said, like calling things gay or just offhanded anti-Semitic remarks weren't really thought of as offensive as they were, and it's got to be an interesting angle growing up, just knowing that you're gay at that, not like coming out at a later age, just already knowing it and hearing people say dumb shit like that, like, "Oh, it's so gay." Like, really? But
right, that's real world. Actually, we kind of were discussing that in relation to scary dreams, but then there's a separate question for the teen years about whether or not there was anything that actually terrified you in real life. This could potentially answer both questions, or do you think there's something else that you would like to respond to that question with?
I think it's a similar answer for both eras of my life. That, yeah, social situations have been a source of horror for me.
Yes, that's how we got off on this tangent. And per that, I was thinking earlier, like, I think it's just generally, like you said, it's in the air, I don't know if it's something that's less in this current generation and more in the 80s, 90s generation, but it just seems like, for me growing up in that era, it was just always a constant pressure to fit in, to be accepted by others. And like, there was that constant dread of, oh my God, am I going to do something that's going to fuck up and everybody's going to hate me? Like, it's just always, there was always a pressure to fit in socially.
Yeah. I mean, when I was like 9 years old, I even had a playground talk with like the other neighborhood girls who had decided collectively that I was out of their clique. They were like, "We decided it's best not to be friends anymore."
Huh.
I know.
How old were you?
9. I was 9 years old.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
I mean, it's
nice.
something that I can laugh about now as well. But at the time, this was, a huge trauma for me. Like, it was just one day, from one day to the next, I had, and then I didn't have any friends. And it was because of what I was wearing, for sure, at that time.
What were you? Are you talking about like the horror stuff or something else?
Yeah, like band T-shirts and whatever, goth makeup and jewelry. The typical Hot Topic shit that was around at this time, and is still around, I guess. Nothing against it at all. I just mean, like, I was a child, and I was just trying to establish my some kind of rebellious sense of aesthetic identity, which was cool and worked for me, but it obviously was a source of a lot of exclusion.
Yeah,
at the time.
I'm sure. Flipping that last question around again to the opposite, were there any times in your teenage years where you felt completely calm or safe or bliss?
Well, I started playing music when I was. I started playing drums when I was 10, and then I started to play in bands when I was like 13, 14 years old. So I think this was a huge step for me as a person in relation to other people. So I was able to have meaningful interactions and connections with other people in this way, and with myself. So yeah, that I for sure playing drums and watching films with my mom as a consistent through line for my youth.
moving into adult years, you mentioned The Eyes of My Mother. If we were to pick, like, say, the top 2 or 3 things that really stand out to you in your adult years, is that on the list, or are there other things that you want to discuss other than that?
Oh my God, there's so many. It's impossible. I mentioned earlier I was doing a podcast with some friends, and she was interviewing me and another mutual friend, because the 3 of us watch films together all the time. And she was asking us our top 3 horror films from every decade from the 60s until today. And
Okay.
I brought up The Eyes of My Mother in my discussion of the 2010s. But yeah, oh my God, there's just so damn many. I guess some big ones for me from the 10s onward are like Hereditary and The Witch. Prevenge is a really funny dark horror film that I like a lot. I liked Titan, Hellbender.
So that's 5 already. Let's start with Hereditary. What jumps out to you about Hereditary?
Oh, just amazing performances, and it's also one of these horror films about grief, which has become a really big theme in horror that I find super fascinating and effective. And like just fucked up family dynamics. Like think about the mother and son over having this dinner conversation where she just like hugely rejects him. I can't remember what the line is now. I've actually only seen the film once, which is crazy because I should have watched it 10 times by now.
Something that stupid face on your face.
Yeah, it's something like this where like don't look at me, or like whatever it is, where it's just like this major moment of rejection.
Yeah.
And I really like films that are showing kind of like mothers as imperfect and flawed humans, because why shouldn't they be?
Yeah.
You know, but in so much of media, they're held to this impossible standard. It's also something that I appreciate. Oh yeah, we need to talk about Kevin, which is an amazing film with Tilda Swinton. And
yeah, you're right. That's a good angle there too. It's like the I want to say the flawed mother, but the not perfect mother. Like,
yeah, totally.
What do you do with a child like that? Like, there is no way to be perfect or successful.
Yeah, but there's this huge, insane pressure that you're supposed to perform in this kind of way, and then once her child commits a school shooting, mass murder, like everyone around her starts to blame her for it. You know, like there's a woman in the grocery store who like breaks all the eggs in her shopping cart and whatever, and then she goes home and she eats the omelet with all the broken egg shards in it. And I remember that scene just like really stuck with me, because it was like she feels like she deserves this. Yeah. And that's a really great comment on the way that this huge societal pressure on mothers to perform in this perfect way. And also a big one for the Babadook.
Yeah.
What about The Witch?
The Witch is just so fucking beautiful and delicious of a film, right? There's that line, "Would you like to live deliciously?"
Yeah. I love that part.
Black Phillip.
My favorite parts.
And these creepy twins. There's so much atmosphere in that film. I feel like it does so much while also showing so little, and there's this like amazing sense of austerity.
Right.
What about Prevenge?
Have you seen Prevenge?
I have not. It's on my list.
It's another imperfect mother film. It was written and directed by and starring Alice Lowe when she was 8 months pregnant. She's super pregnant in the film, and she's like possessed by her murderous unborn child, who is like compelling her to kill people basically, and also seek revenge because her husband had died in some kind of a like climbing accident or something, and she's out to like, I don't know, she's kind of working through her trauma with that, and also wants to get back at whoever was responsible for it. But there's a lot of dark humor in it. It's doing a lot, this film. And it's a little underdog film that not that many people know, so I really I do recommend. And The Eyes of My Mother I was also talking about with friends earlier, even though it might not have been a huge one for me. It really stuck. It really stuck with me, and I watched it again last night, and I was happy to say that it aged well. You know, like I was just as compelled by it watching it again.
What about Teton?
Titan, yes. Julia Ducournau, who also made Raw. Yeah.
Was it the same director?
Yeah. Same director as
That
well.
explains a lot. Okay.
I just think this is such a good queer horror film. And I really want to see more queer horror out there. Which there is more happening. I also watched Five Devils recently, which is a great sort of fantastical horror film that's queer. But yeah, Titan, I think there's like this great sort of sense of like queer chosen family happening in there, which is like kind of touching at the same time as it's totally dark and delusional. There's this question of like what happens when this girl has this like traumatic accident, she gets a metal plate in her head, and there's sort of like this sense that she's not really a predictable human anymore. Like her behavior after that is like, yeah, she's no longer fully human, and so she becomes, she can be anything in a sense. Like it's sort of this kind of like radical power to transform. And in one act of the film, she's a mass murderer, and the next act of the film, she's suddenly supposedly a teenage boy, which, you know, it doesn't really, like, we know that it doesn't make sense, and we know that the people around her are suspicious of this guise, but there's like this sort of sense, like there's this sort of like untouchable power that she has. There's a lot of just kind of like sort of inexplicable fantasy elements at play here that are about sort of like this ongoing building of a delusion where it just sucks you into this sort of world. And there's great dance sequences and like a lot of just like strange, absurd, sort of surreal moments.
What about Hellbender?
Yeah, I really love this mother-daughter duo. I think that they've also been making films together. This family has been making films together since Zelda was like 10 or 11 years old, and she's like 17 in this film. Wow. So they've got this crazy filmmaking history behind them. They're very DIY, and then they've built up this really great on-screen dynamic together, which I think is really like you can see it. There's something really interesting about a family making films together, and you can see that like the dynamics on screen are a lot older than what you're actually seeing.
They're the Jackson 5 of horror movies.
I guess so. Yeah, kind of.
And it's interesting to see them explore their own connections through these allegories, you know, through like being part of a lineage of witches. Like they're kind of exploring their own power in a way that like it's fantastical, but it's also sort of like it has a certain level of realism as well. You know, like why shouldn't this actually be true or like a part of their history? And they also have this like mother-daughter rock band in the film, which is super sweet. I really wish I could have shown this film to my mother, I have to say, because she died just around the time that this was coming out. Yeah, but she would have totally loved it.
Sounds like it, yeah. Okay, so for adult years now, horror or Halloween in Germany, you said that you've got a little bit of expat stuff going on there. Favorite costume as an adult?
I have not dressed up in many years. I'm a little bit too I'm too low maintenance and lazy. Like we actually every year we do a Halloween screening at Final Girls. So that's been an annual tradition since 2017. And Ellie, my co-director, she gets super into it. She did like this great kind of like evil nun costume one year. I can't even remember if I've definitely, I mean, I have dressed up. I was a vampire one year, but I just sort of like wore a cape and put some fake blood going down my chin. And, you know, I'm already really pale and have dark hair, so it wasn't that much of a stretch. God.
I've definitely gone with some phone it in costumes some years. Just like, I got this thing.
One year I was just, I covered myself with like cheap Halloween decorations, and I was just like a Halloween store bargain bin, you know, like I just had like little paper bats and like...
what are you dressed up as? Spirit of Halloween?
Yeah, pretty much. It was like a very silly conceptual costume. No, but I haven't put in the real effort to do like a proper Halloween costume in a long time.
Is there anything in real life that has terrified you as an adult?
I remember like around the beginning of Me Too, I think I was very horrified by certain revelations. I remember like I remember when it came out that Louis C.K. was a creep. And I had been a huge fan of his. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm a big horror fan, but of course, in my free time, I'm also watching other shit, and I'm watching a lot of comedy and like indie, whatever else. And I had just watched Horace and Pete and was so into it, and I'd watched all of his sitcoms and shit like that, and all of his stand up. And I just remember that there was something about finding out that he'd been an abusive creep that I was like, I remember after that happened, I had like a dream about one of my college professors abusing me, like something. And I remember just knowing when I woke up that it was really connected to finding out about Louis C.K., where I was just like, damn it, like nobody, like nothing is sacred. You know what I mean? Like there's just this sort of sense that like people with power, there's so many people with power who are abusing it. And yeah, like anybody who you may have admired is, yeah, like there's such a huge chance that they're going to be, it's going to be brought to light that they've been immoral, unethical in some way.
Let's flip that.
Yeah, and then of course, I mean, the other most horrifying thing that's happened to me was losing my mother to cancer. I mean, this is the huge trauma of my life, trauma and tragedy of my life. So, having survived that, nothing really compares.
I don't really know.
So I had to, see her lose herself, both physically and mentally in the last months of her life.
Yeah, Steve and I can both relate.
And I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah. It's a rough thing to see a parent deteriorate over time like that. It's not good.
Yeah.
Yeah. My case, it wasn't cancer, it was COVID, but that's a whole story.
Yes, that's a different podcast.
Yeah.
And also seeing my grandmother get dementia as well. She lived a very long time, but I had to also lose her in that way and experience her slipping away in terms of how much she could remember and could function.
Oh
yeah, I can also relate to that. That happened to my family recently too. It's tough especially when they forget who you are.
My grandmother it was hard to tell if it was dementia or related to the strokes she had, because they can both have similar effects in ways, but it was heartrending to see, like you could see it in her eyes, like she knew what she wanted to say, but she couldn't find the words, or maybe she either knew the word in her brain but couldn't get it out of her mouth. Like there was some sort of disconnect. Yeah. Flipping the question around, is there a time in your life, adult life, where you felt completely calm or safe or at bliss?
I think there have been moments with different people, different friends or partners, where we had moments of bliss together. Simple moments, in nature or on a ferry in Istanbul or something like that, just simple moments together with others. Yeah.
I went to Istanbul once. Never left the airport, but I got real Turkish coffee. So good.
I was also there, but didn't get coffee.
Dude, you need to get real Turkish coffee. It's like jump-starting your brain.
Cuban coffee I have had. Let's see. So the next two questions I'm going to ask at the same time, because it could be the same answer for both, or it could be two different answers. And I know this is going to be difficult, but I will ask anyway.
Top 3 is an option.
Yeah. What movie have you watched more times than any other? And what would you say is your favorite movie? And by the way, this is not just horror related. This is over your entire life in any genre.
Yeah, that's an easy one to answer. There's one that exceeds the others probably tenfold, and that's Ghost World.
Okay.
By Terry Zwigoff with Thora Birch and Scarlett Johansson as teenage outcast girls in their friendship together. It's also based on a graphic novel by Daniel Clowes.
That makes a lot of sense. It's got kind of a graphic novel feel to it.
I fucking adore that film. And I saw it in theaters. It was out when I was only 11 years old, but even at that time, I saw it 3 times in theaters. I went once with my mom, then I made my dad take me, and then I made my mom take me again. Because, I was 11. I couldn't go to anything by myself.
Right.
And from then on, I watched it at least once a year sometimes, yeah, for sure more than that in the first few years. I had like a VHS copy, and then I had a DVD, and then, yeah, the file on my hard drive. It's all well worn.
Would you consider it your favorite movie, or is there something else you would hold that?
So I'm not sure. I for sure it was my favorite film up until college. It's still one of my absolute favorites. I have a really strong, just a connection to it. I think my favorite movie, it might be Dogtooth from Yorgos Lanthimos. Do you know it?
It's that is also on the list. I'm meaning to see. It's about like just a fucked up culture of miscreant youths, I think.
It's not. That's not it.
Nope. Okay.
But I'm curious.
It's about kids, right?
It's about a family, 3 teenagers who are kept inside by their controlling father, who basically keeps them prisoner in their home, and they sort of develop their own sort of language and rituals. And it's like a very weird, absurdist film.
Okay.
Like, it's deeply creepy. It's definitely a horror or horror adjacent film in some ways, because there's the frame around it is that they're being held captive and they're being abused by their father, but within that, their world together is like very like colorful and fantastical, and there's like just also again weird dance sequences. Yeah, weird games that they play with each other. I haven't seen it in a while. Like, I'm not sure I can call it my favorite film, but it's up there. It left such a huge impression on me.
I was just going to ask, why would you consider it your favorite if you were to consider it your favorite?
I just remember seeing it and being like, wow, this is it. Like, this is what I want out of a movie, and it remained that way with me. But I mean, then there's films that are my favorite for different reasons, like Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, which I'm guessing you've seen, from the 60s, with Joan Crawford and Bette Davis playing sisters. One of them was a former child star, but is kind of like trapped in time and still wants to be a famous child star, even though she's like in her 60s.
Chris has a gap pre-2000s, and I also missing that one.
Okay, well, you have to see Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. And this is something that I watched also with my mother a lot, and we laughed about it so much. And it was kind of this ongoing joke that we'd have about, like, you know, she would be like, oh, when I'm older, this is what I'm going to be like. You know what I mean? Like, whatever. Like, there was kind of just this like ongoing joke about, again, like being delusional or like weird domestic sort of like these kinds of like very claustrophobic domestic situations where like again, sisters living together in a weird state of disarray, also like in Grey Gardens. So yeah, like that film is like very special to me, you know what I mean? Because it has this kind of like narrative connection with my mother and I joking about it forever, and like we would sing the song. There's like a really creepy song at the beginning that is an important part of the film that like we would sing that song together, and it would just come up a lot. And now it's at my festival, there's been this like a few people who've given talks on hagsploitation cinema, which is this history of like older women, like that being the source of horror in these films, like aging women who are not following the rules in some sense by being quiet or domesticated. So that's an important film to me. Yeah.
I think I see the reasons why. Do you see any common threads about what kinds of horror you like? Cannibalism, occult, metaphysical?
Yeah. Definitely psychological horror is important for me. I'm trying to think of how, like, I like when there's supernatural elements that are a bit like a more kind of like subtle supernatural thing going on. Like have you seen Don't Look Now from the 70s?
No, but that came up in a couple of different interviews too, and it's also on the list. So many films I need to get around watching.
This is a huge one.
Sadly, I've watched a review of Don't Look Now, so I know the twist at the end. And
but you should still see it. It doesn't matter.
Yeah,
it's still a beautiful, crazy, sad film. Again, a grief horror. This is like an early grief horror film. This is like the godmother of grief horror films. And there's all these like creepy details. Like there's a clairvoyant blind woman and her sister who this couple meet on when they're on vacation, and like, yeah, the clairvoyant woman is saying that she has seen their dead daughter and she's laughing and whatever. And there's something about like this particular kind of figure. This figure represents a lot of what I love in horror films, where it's like this elderly blind clairvoyant woman who comes in and shakes things up, you know, where there's like this couple, they're just, you know, they're on a kind of working vacation, grieving, having a quiet time. And this like creepy ass old blind woman comes in and is like, let me take you to the other world. You know what I mean? Like she's sort of this like bridge to the, to the underworld or whatever. And, sorry, I didn't mean to sound like I'm like, oh, she's a creepy ass old blind woman. Like, yeah, I mean, you know, that's my sense of humor with these things. You know what I mean? But actually, I'm like, she's awesome. Like, that's my hero. You know what I mean? That's the hero of the film.
Well, what it says to me is empowerment.
Yeah, and it's similar with like in Rosemary's Baby, the Ruth Gordon figure, who's like, she's an old Satanist. You know, like she seems like she's just kind of like this annoying old nosy neighbor. But actually, she's a Satanist, you know, like she's trying to facilitate the birthing of the devil's spawn. Mm-hmm. But she's in the guise of just this like old nosy neighbor. There's a term for this, like the sleepers or something, or like they're like under wraps or something like that. You know what I mean? Where it's secrets. Like, you think this is somebody, you think this is something harmless or something, you know, even like a little bit of maybe they're a bit annoying or they're a bit like they're made out to be kind of a nuisance or something, but actually they come out to be this like transcendently gruesome or supernatural or whatever horror term applies.
Well, it kind of touches on two things that you've brought up, which is empowerment and underdogs. This character is true. A bit of an underdog at first, but then the empowerment comes and then it's this flipping of the table.
Yeah.
So this is normally where we talk a little bit about the topics that keep coming up during the call. And of course, it's different for every call. And then we have a few follow-up questions that we then talk about what has come up. But I'll share with you the things that I have made some notes of, and you can tell me either right or wrong, or if you think there's some better summaries and go from there. But, you know, the things that I see coming up multiple times are relationships with your mom or grandmother or women in general, power imbalances. You know, there's a lot of either empowerment or, you know, even like the social fears. I think that kind of ties in with the power imbalances too, that there's this discomfort of some sort of an imbalance there. Queer horror came up a little bit, but again, I think that also kind of
could have come up more. I could have also talked about like Daughters of Darkness or like, you know, other Alucarda films like this. There could have been a whole nother episode where I'm just nerding out about queer horror, just to put that out there.
Understood, but I still think that kind of falls under the power imbalances. But more than that, all of the three things that I just mentioned there, the power imbalances, the queer horror, and the relationships with the women in your life, I feel all three of those kind of subsume under the topic of grief, which has come up. And so I wonder, do you think that's a good through line for the conversation, or not just for this conversation, but your connection to horror in general, even outside of this conversation? Or do you think that there's a more accurate through line that we're missing?
Yeah, I think you did a pretty good summary just then. I'm impressed, to be honest. I guess you've been taking notes, huh?
Thank you. Yes.
I've been hearing
that's what he does.
Yes, the typing.
I just like to talk horror, and Steve does the psychology bit of it. But no, I kind of caught that earlier on in the interview as well. Grief is definitely a bit of a main vein.
Oh, for sure.
It seems.
And if we talk about like as if it's a college degree and you have a major and a minor, I would say that the minor silliness has come up a couple times, and I'm wondering if that's a response to the grief. You know, the freedom of, I'm not going to worry about that right now.
I think it's just human to want a range, right?
Yeah.
We all want a range of experiences and sensibilities, right? I don't think that my love of humor is a reaction or a response to my love of the horrific. I think they both. I like putting them together. I enjoy when the two interact with each other, but they don't always need to. I think they're often in their own lanes.
Understood.
Yeah. But speaking of social horror, just because you brought it up again, and I feel I'd be remiss not to mention it, and that's the movie Three Women from the 70s, which again you have to add to your list. It has Shelley Duvall and Sissy Spacek in it. Two queens of horror, and it's one big social nightmare, basically.
Yeah. You can see how that and the topic of Three Women could find its way into your heart.
It also is one of my favorite films of all time. Like, if I had to do the top three and I needed to stick with the two I mentioned earlier, then Three Women is also in there.
So the obvious next question then is, any idea why that these things are important to you? Meaning we could either talk about grief as a topic or the individual subsections of, relationships and power imbalances and things like that.
Yeah. I mean, I appreciate the question, but I feel like I've been answering that over the last 2 hours. I don't know how much more I can say about it. Than I gave you a lot of my life story, and I think it's in there. It's all embedded in there.
I felt the same way, but I didn't want to put words in your mouth. So
no, yeah, I think you did a really good job summing it up.
Thank you. So next question then is, why horror? Have you explored these kinds of emotions in other genres, or, do you feel that there's something special about horror that speaks to this more accurately than other genres?
Yeah, there is so much special about horror, and the way that it can be like a way to explore both like fantasies and fears, and also problematic power structures, things that are ill in our society. I think it's just a super powerful medium for looking at what's wrong and how what's possible for alternatives. Like it's also a great form of exploring like wish fulfillment, whether that be in the form of, it could be something in the form of revenge, but it can also be something in a completely different language than that. It's just more like, okay, how can we come into power in ways that are meaningful and that haven't been pictured before? And I think horror is a really good arena for that. And it's not always dark. Sometimes it's like an extremely exciting and enlightening sort of thing.
Understood. Yeah, I liked what you said about being a super powerful medium, because I think that's common in a lot of the people we've talked to, that to relate it to music, since that's something that you're also very familiar with. I've always liked the analogy that newer music, you keep things in the I statements here, but for me, newer music doesn't hit the same emotionally as older music, because there's a limited number of emotions I think that I have access to. Maybe all humans have access to. And there are certain songs that elicit certain emotions. And I almost feel like there are certain songs already tied to certain emotions. And so when I hear a new song that relates to that same emotion, I kind of feel like, okay, but I have a song for that. You know what I mean? Like there's something that already hits me on a deep level. And this is just not a rehash, but yeah, seats taken. And I kind of feel like it might be a similar situation with horror fans, in that a lot of the things that we're talking about could be maybe discussed in other genres, but I feel like maybe horror is more powerful to some people because of the history that they already have with it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm sure that my history with it is a big part of why I'm still so fascinated with it and engaging with it so heavily. And it's, it's part of how I connect to people. Like the person who I co-direct Final Girls with, Ellie, she and I connected first over our love of horror films, basically. And it's just, it's part of our friendship. It's part of our common language. Yeah, it feels good to like continue down that avenue. And for sure, I have friends who don't appreciate horror, and we find a lot of other media that we can enjoy together. But yeah, it's such a great thing to find other horror fans who I can explore it with. And it's a little bit more rare here in Berlin, just to let you know. Like, the Germans do not have a good relationship with horror. So most of my horror fan friends are not German, actually. Yeah.
I wonder why that is.
Oh, there's plenty of reasons, I'm sure.
Yeah, I was going to say. Yeah. I think there's a lot of answers to that question.
Yeah, I know that's a separate conversation, but I still have the question. Do you have is there anything that you've thought of that might be relevant that either hasn't come up on the call, or like you thought of something earlier and then the conversation took a left turn and you didn't get to say it?
That's funny. I think earlier when you were asking about if my being Jewish has to do with experiences of like exclusion in my youth, I didn't mention this earlier, but I think that also like it is valid to mention like intergenerational trauma. Mm-hmm. Just that I think there's something there, you know, that like, yeah, probably my great grandparents were ostracized from their village in Eastern Europe or some shit like that, you know, that they were driven out. They had to emigrate for a reason, you know. It wasn't just because they were excited for opportunities for growth, you know. It was also probably larger experiences of exclusion and not being welcome somewhere. Yeah. So like, yeah, like it's all conjecture, but it's very likely that this is something that's embedded in my DNA.
Right? Like, I mean, that's, again, a whole other podcast here, but that is something that I've never really, like, I've heard the term, but never really given to a lot of thought to, which is intergenerational trauma. I mean, you inherit, in some cases, emotional and behavioral traits. I don't know if it's, you know, you can argue nature versus nurture, but there is a bit of it that is nurture and you inherit it through generations down. So, I mean, does the trauma inherit?
There are a lot of studies that are indicating that that's really like a scientifically viable thing, that this is a thing that's happening. Yeah.
That's crazy and tragic.
Yeah. There have been many things on this call that we have said this could be another topic for another different call. But but to add to that list, there's also the conversation about your experiences now living in Germany with all this background. Again, whole other conversation. Well, let me hit the closing. Again, thank you for your time. We will get together with you offline to put together a bio for you and link to whatever it is that you want us to link to, get some pictures we can use in a slideshow for promotional stuff. But thank you to anybody out there listening. Do come visit us at horrormakesUshappy.com. We've got a list of guests that we have already interviewed there, some people that we also have a wish list. If you want to add anybody to the list, let us know. You can buy merch, support us on Patreon. Thank you again to Legion Podcast for supporting us on Patreon. And come visit us and tell a friend.
Yeah.